everybody. Welcome to this side event at the 31st session of the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. My name is Ian Tennant. I'm the moderator for today's event. I'm Vice Chair of the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice and head of the Vienna multilateral representation of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. First of all, some housekeeping. Please make sure, unless you're a panelist, that you're on mute and your video is off. And please note that the session is being recorded and may be shared on YouTube after the event. If you want to ask a question to any of the panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function, or the chat function, I should say, at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Firstly, I want to thank all of our organisers and co-hosts for today's events, the Igarepe Institute, who are the main organiser, alongside Chatham House, the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the UN in Vienna, the Permanent Mission of the UK to the UN in Vienna, and the Permanent Mission of Canada. Just to say that this session is part of the CCPCJ, but also takes place in the context of the ongoing negotiations of the new UN Cybercrime instrument under the Ad Hoc Committee. And this meeting is taking place because we believe that the input of external voices is fundamental to ensuring that the negotiations are making decisions based on the best evidence and data. So we will hear from some of the most prominent civil society organizations engaging in this debate, and from some of the member states most involved in this process. So I would like to start with the diplomat who's been charged with overseeing these negotiations at the UN. Her Excellency Faouzia Membraki is the permanent representative of Algeria to the UN in Vienna, and she's also the chair of the Ad Hoc Committee to elaborate a comprehensive international convention on countering the use and information and communications technologies for criminal purposes. For the purposes of time, I think we can call this committee the Ad Hoc Committee from now on without repeating the long title. So Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us today. The floor is yours. I know you're having issues with the video, so I think we will be listening to you in audio only, but please give us your remarks and what you see as the important role of multi-stakeholders in this process.
Yeah, thank you very much, really, to give me this opportunity to address some ideas, some views, and to exchange with you about the Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime. As you know now, right now there is the CCPCJ committee. Then I am in my office at the UN, and that's why there is this issue of camera, I think. Okay, good afternoon, first of all. Very happy to join this very important event including on multi-stakeholder perspective in the work of the Ad Hoc Committee. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and I will take also this occasion to brief you also on the preparatory work ahead of the second session of the Ad Hoc Committee. As you know, the response to the use of information and communications technologies for criminal purposes requires joint efforts of whole society and international community. Different governmental authorities, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, civil society, academia, and private sector. The important role played by multi-stakeholders in the fight against the use of ICTs for criminal purposes was fully acknowledged by the General Assembly when it established the committee. It is why I attached a great importance to adopt a clear framework to guarantee a meaningful participation of multi-stakeholders, both in formal sessions and the informal sessions. In fact, I sincerely believe that our process needs to be fully informed by the multi-stakeholders' inputs in order to guarantee that the future convention, when adopted, will be effective and practical. Civil society, private sector, and academia could provide useful insight, which should be taken into account by member states during their negotiations. That's why the intersessional meeting are organized before the formal session. In this regard, my expectation in the participation and contribution of multi-stakeholders is very high. And here, some of my views on the format of such contribution. First, I think that in this stage of the work of the ad hoc committee is useless to call into question the process in its whole. It's more constructive to engage into it and try to shape it by concrete inputs. Second, the added value of multi-stakeholders to the process should be the neutral, specialized opinion and expertise, far from any kind of excessive politicization. Third, I hope that multi-stakeholders could help us also to bridge views and to propose us creative solutions to the main topics where we are expecting some difficulties, such as the appropriate approach on criminalization, the debate on the use of specific terms, the nature of safeguards, etc. Now, regarding the next step, we are now preparing the second formal session of the ad hoc committee. On the basis of the written submissions received till now, we are elaborating the negotiating document which compiles the submissions of member states on the 3 chapters under consideration. I want to say that I am very satisfied by the quantity and quality of the contributions received so far from 29 member states, including European Union and CARICOM, and from 11 multi-stakeholders. These contributions give us a solid basis to start our substantial discussions. It is true that there is a diversity of opinions, and I recognize that this will be challenging for me as a chair. But I think that there is also much commonality, and we have to make good use of the existing common ground to build something that could be acceptable to all member states, so as to achieve the universality for the convention. Now, allow me to share some views on the methodology to conduct the work of the second session. After opening the second session, I will present a summary of our discussions at the first intersessional with multi-stakeholders to inform the participant on their principal inputs. Just after that, we will start the consideration of the 3 chapters included in the agenda of the second session, but chapter by chapter. For the sake of inclusivity, I plan to give opportunity to all member states to express their preliminary views on each of the 3 chapters under consideration before considering in detail each chapter. After this preliminary exchange of views, we will proceed toward the detailed examination of the content of each chapter. To facilitate discussion, I will ask some target leading questions in order to explore the possibilities for compromises. As I did in the first session, whenever there will be time, I will give the floor to multi-stakeholders to intervene on the topics under the debate. Just after the second formal session, we plan to have the second intersessional consultation with multi-stakeholders on the 13th and the 14th of June 2022. A call for panelists has been already published on the website of the Ad Hoc Committee. The agenda of the second intersessional will be articulated around the remaining chapters of the future convention, namely international cooperation, technical assistance, prevention measures, mechanism of implementation, final provisions, and preamble, of course. I hope sincerely that we will see broader and more active participation of multi-stakeholders in this second intersessional and benefit from a focused and concrete contributions in order to better inform the third formal session of the Ad Hoc Committee. Here were some remarks and ideas that I want to share with you. I apologize for not being able to participate in the panel as I have other commitments. Thank you very much. Allow me to ask to my collaborator, my assistant, my dear colleague Tahar, to join you. Maybe if you have some questions, he is able to answer. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for explaining the efforts that you're going to make sure that the perspectives of civil society and other experts are included in the process. Although we are grateful for your time, we're also grateful to Tahar for spending more time with us as well, in case there are any questions later on. Thank you very much indeed. Next, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Troy Lulashnik, the permanent representative of Canada to the UN in Vienna. Canada has been a strong supporter of civil society engagement in this process, and I would like to invite you, Ambassador, to take the floor and give us your perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Really pleased to be here to talk about this subject. I think our discussion is happening at a critical time, particularly as we begin to chart the course ahead for the future UN Treaty on Cybercrime. We're certainly indebted to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime for highlighting the importance of including external perspectives in the negotiations of the treaty. It's almost a truism to say, but our experience has demonstrated clearly that negotiating international treaties that affect so many people is something that governments cannot do effectively in isolation. Across the spectrum of international negotiations, civil society organizations provide crucial assistance and offer unique attributes such as the independent nature, the global reach, the very high level of community integration, and all of these things militate together to make civil society invaluable partners to international negotiations. And this certainly includes the Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime. We very much welcome the approach of the Algerian ambassador that we just heard and her leadership to ensure that civil society organizations have a voice in the negotiations with the invitation of their participation and organization of a series of intersessional consultations between the negotiating sessions, I think only will enrich our discussions. And so if we are able to listen carefully to civil society and integrate those perspectives, I think that will only strengthen the treaty. In the context of cybercrime, generally, I think civil society organizations engage and make a very important contribution through a wide array of activities, from advocacy to, let's be honest, keeping governments in check, providing greater transparency, accountability, institutionalization. I think they can also play an instrumental role across the thematic lines, like promoting incorporation of a gender perspective and the role of women, advocating for the protection of freedom of expression and human rights and respect for rule of law. In our experience, CSOs have been very valuable also in mobilizing the political will on a global scale. You know, if we look at negotiating UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and associated SDGs, it was inclusive and certainly civil society not only enrich the debate and discussion, but mobilize the support, which is also critically important. I'd say in developing the laws, programs, and policies, Canada uses a number of different public participation activities, ensuring that we get that cross-section of views and that all those views are taken into account. In the context of cybercrime, we funded training for CSOs, supported very kindly by Chatham House to facilitate participation in the treaty discussions, providing support to women in cyber fellows in order to increase female representation in these negotiations, in line with our desire to see gender perspectives reflected and the role of gender in implementing the future cybercrime convention. And that's all wonderful and supportive, and absolutely that's where we stand. But I would say we have a growing concern that there are increasing threats to civil society, to freedom of expression, and to ability of these organizations to participate in negotiations in meaningful ways. And I can only underscore that multilateralism is strengthened when we ensure that NGOs, CSOs can bring their expertise and knowledge to the table, give a voice to the poorest and most vulnerable of our populations, and advocate for those who are directly affected by government action and policies. And so this, in our view, is critical. The recently launched cybercrime negotiations are already benefiting from such inputs. And let's make sure that this can continue for this treaty and for, in fact, all of the other crime treaties, the Vienna-based commissions, all of these activities, to make sure that they're more inclusive. I just say, in sum, we believe strongly that civil society organizations often serve not only as the eyes and the ears of the international community on the ground, but also as our collective conscience. We strongly encourage and want to see more open cooperation, and look forward to working to integrate civil society more closely in UN negotiations. And it's only under such conditions we're able to establish strong, efficient, useful UN conventions that give us the tools we need in our collective fight, in this case against cybercrime, but more generally in trying to make the world a better place. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very supportive words, and for the as well for the actions that you've described, with which and resources through which Canada is supporting civil society engagement in this process. Now we've heard from two of the prominent diplomats here in Vienna what exactly civil society engagement could and in fact does look like when it comes to negotiating this treaty. And I think it's fair to say we have an opportunity to engage in this process on behalf of civil society. So I'm very pleased that we've assembled a panel of three of the most prominent voices so far on the part of civil society engaging in the ad hoc committee's work. And we're going to have a panel discussion with those three experts now. I'm very pleased to say we have with us Louise Marie Hurel from the Igarape Institute. Louise is a researcher and project coordinator for the Institute's Digital Security Program. Joyce Hackmey from Chatham House is a senior research fellow with the International Security Program at Chatham House and the co-editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy. And Summer Walker is the Global Initiatives Head of Multilateral Affairs in New York. Thank you very much for joining us, Louise, Joyce, and Summer.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a question which I hope all of you will have the opportunity to answer. So firstly, now we've understood and we've experienced a bit of the ad hoc committee's work. How, in practical terms, do you think we can make the most of the modalities for civil society participation and to get the most value for the ad hoc committee's work and for the outcome of the work, which is a treaty? If I can ask Louise to respond to that question first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian. I'd just like to take the moment also to thank Madam Chair Faouzia and Troy and Vice Chair Sagosio for also being here in this discussion. I think this is really important. I think one of the things to think about civil society's effective participation in processes such as the AHC is to think about it as a multi-layered process. And I think this side event is part of thinking that multi-layeredness. So as we've seen, not only, let's say, in the context of the AHC, but in other places such as the open-ended working group on cybersecurity that I think we can talk a little bit more about in terms of thinking participation in processes. So participation in the sense, I think it's about first being able to be in the room, of course, whenever possibly physically in the room. And I think, we will see that in this next round of negotiations. I think that is definitely a game changer. It is a place where civil society gets to not only listen to interventions, provide formal inputs to parts of the dedicated session, but also this enables, if in the room, for civil society organizations to actually engage bilaterally with delegations. And here I'm really focusing on in terms of formats, because sometimes I think we look at participation as a one-way stream where we just want to be in the room, but it happens in a multi-layered way, as I mentioned. So the third element, or perhaps the third way in which we can conceive the different ways of engaging, is also for organizations, and I can say for IGARAPE, and I know both of you have also been doing that from the Chatham House and the GI-TOC side, is to also engage with national, kind of at the national level, right? Engaging with national delegations, speaking to the different MFAs, and of course over at IGARAPE, we try to do that in different countries across Latin America more specifically. But we do know that that is not always the case. As Ambassador Troy mentioned, some CSOs do face pressures from their respective governments. So that is why it's not just one place, it's not just being in the room, but actually creating different venues for these different CSOs to engage. And we have also, been working with different civil society organizations and trying to, whenever possible, find common ground across our position so that we can provide coordinated inputs, because then we also strengthen each other's position, those that are working at the local level but that don't get the opportunity to engage internationally. And of course, one of the latest examples, and I'll stop here, is our collaboration with Chatham House in organizing an America's Cybercrime consultation for non-governmental stakeholders. And the objective is really to have a report. We just organized it this past month. And the idea is to share that report with government delegations. So I just wanted to kind of provide these different layers and what we can actually do to strengthen each other and to also communicate with different delegations.
Thank you, Louise, and for kind of reminding us that it's, that there's more going on than just in the room itself, that there are other platforms through which we can engage. And thanks for explaining those. You mentioned Chatham House, so I'll go to Joyce next and see if she can answer the same question that you did from her perspective.
Thank you very much, Ian, and it's great to be with you here today. And thank you to the ambassadors for their opening remarks. I mean, when you sort of asked this question, I couldn't but think about the time when we were waiting on the modalities of this session, of this process to be decided. And I think back then, the prevalent mood was that multi-stakeholders perhaps will have very limited opportunities to engage, building on perhaps other UN processes and this general mood that Ambassador Troy referred to of limited inclusivity when it comes to the multi-stakeholders and civil society in specific. So I think when the modalities were decided, were agreed upon, I think it's safe to say that the multi-stakeholder participation came as a positive surprise, that actually there will be plenty of opportunities to engage in the actual negotiations and in the intersessionals. And I think the chair has played quite a big role in ensuring that this happens, at least that from the experience of the first round. But the fact that we have, those opportunities is a great thing, but at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on, ensuring that we have the right resources in place, that we have the right time to be prepared to have a meaningful participation, because it is very important, as Louise said, to be in the room, but it's also very important to have meaningful participation while being in the room, right? And thinking about ways in which we can play that role that the ambassador from Canada highlighted. But it's also important to remind ourselves that it's not a homogeneous group when we say the multi-stakeholders, right? We have in that group, internet service providers, tech companies, advocacy group, think tanks, etc. So it's a very, very heterogeneous group that brings different kinds of expertise and has different agendas and that has different approaches and different experience. So there's a very rich expertise that we can build on, but the challenge is that we have a short time frame within which this process is being developed. So I think, against this background, the kind of key word in terms of practical, you asked about how can we be practical. 3 key words come to mind. Complementarity for impact. I think we have to be really conscious of this available expertise, and we have to not only identify the needs, where are the needs in these negotiations from the structure that has been agreed upon, from the negotiations and the emerging points that are being discussed. What are the needs? How can the multi-stakeholder help meet those needs? How do we identify the expertise and really bring the right people in the room? Because I think this is one of the processes that has so much in it. Like, you need human rights expertise, law enforcement expertise, legal expertise. So it's not something that one group of stakeholders can bring. So you do need all these different expertise in the room. And I think in addition to providing that expertise, I think the multi-stakeholders and organizations like ours have this role of the connector, right? Of the making sure that, this expertise is being brought into the table. So in addition to, for ourselves to actually be in the room and provide the expertise, also ensuring that the people who know, who have that really very technical expertise are also in the room and are able to provide their views. And I can give concrete examples of how we're doing that, but maybe later in the discussion. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I'm going to go to Summer now and actually ask another question, which is, based on her experience where she is, in New York, and previous experiences that she's worked on, what perspectives do you think civil society groups can bring on cybercrime that would add new evidence and information for the benefit of the diplomats negotiating this treaty?
Hi, thanks, Ian. And thanks to everyone for joining. Thank you to the ambassadors for opening this very interesting meeting. Just before I jump into that question, I just want to add, I think Louise and Joyce really covered what civil society can bring, but 2 very practical things that have come up as the process has gotten underway is that perhaps spacing out the intercessionals from when the AHC meetings are held will help keep momentum throughout the process. At the moment, they are occurring sort of right after the meetings, so a little bit more space. And I think it's always dependent on COVID, of course, but the more we can meet in person and the more we can engage in person with delegates throughout the process, so side events alongside the AHC and things that really bring in civil society and outsiders and get them into Vienna and into New York, I think is important. But on the question of what perspectives and experiences can civil society bring, I mean, as Joyce was mentioning, the group is expansive, right? There are experts who have technical knowledge and they bring research experience that help diplomats and all stakeholders grasp a better understanding of very complex issues. They also have knowledge of potential blowback for proposed laws and approaches. But also there are groups who bring the context of how cyber crimes impact them and their communities. So for example, you can think about money mobile app frauds that people may not even really be aware of. And in the community, people are led to believe that it's their fault, that they're being duped. They don't know how to seek redress, for example. So seeing how things play out in different contexts and what we already have to remedy harms and what might be needed to remedy harms, I think is very important. I think, one thing we should really recognize is almost all of us have been victims of a cybercrime, whether it's a bank having information stolen, the passwords of an email server, or a subscription service we use. But I think a lot of people outside of the technical space feel removed from this agenda. And so I think it's really important to try to bring people into the fold, which is one thing I know everybody in this meeting is doing.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Summer. And if I can go back to Louise and ask what specific perspectives and experiences you think. I mean, you're focused on Latin America. You said earlier, what experiences can civil society groups from the region bring that adds new perspectives to this debate?
Yes, absolutely, Ian. I guess in terms of Igarape's engagement, we have been studying cybercrime groups, different gangs online, let's say for the past 10 years. So in terms of actually tracing and following the discussion and trying to make sense of what is the threat landscape actually in conjunction with this kind of more national dialogue, I think that it has been something that we've been carrying throughout the past years. I guess the challenge here for us is really how do we ensure, and I think we're working in this, being a connector in different levels, how can we ensure that different organizations also that are working and collating this, let's say, this expertise throughout the years, that they are actually able to dialogue and bring their own expertise? Because I definitely agree with Summer when she says that, and I say that also from, Igarape's perspective, that we can bring context to the discussion. When we look, for example, at the region, of Latin American region, we can foresee conflict in laws, we can think about undue expansion of criminalization in very specific ways, but having that bridge to the international level allows us to think, okay, with other civil society organizations and other non-governmental entities, okay, is there a baseline to our discussion here, aside from our contextual particularities? So for example, if we think about, and in the context of, an election kind of year, such as the one that we're living over now in Brazil, would it make sense to include, for example, criminalize, let's say, some kind of speech that could be qualified as misinformation? Maybe not. Maybe that would expand or have trickle-down effects at the national level, for example. One thing that we heard from other kind of organizations, actually from different member states, is, and from the consultation as well that we hosted together with Chatham House, is, for example, in Colombia, perhaps the concerns with cybercrime might be much more attached with cross-border drug trafficking. And in Mexico, for example, Mexico's contribution to the AHC stressed the importance of having a narrow approach to criminalization, to thinking about content crimes being only qualifiable when they actually are considered gender-based violence. So that would be, let's say, a narrow example of a narrow approach to thinking content-based crimes. But still, I think that is the conversation that we're trying to tether here, is how do we connect this contextual expertise? How do we dialogue with the international and actually together with non-governmental organizations? Is there a baseline? Is there any kind of commonality that we can find, and actually translate that into specific kind of recommendations, such as, let's say, if we're talking about, and we're not necessarily favoring content-based crimes because we think that would be an overexpansion of criminalization and it would have effects, but thinking, for example, in this case of Mexico, just narrowing it down to gender-based violence, is there a way for us to take the conversation forward? So yes, I think that would be, let's say, an example from a regional perspective.
Thank you very much, Louise. And Joyce, you're working, Chatham House, a UK-based think tank working globally. I mean, what are the best examples that you can think of in terms of insights and perspectives that would benefit this discussion that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so when we are thinking, because we do have a project, as Ambassador Troy mentioned, funded by Global Affairs Canada, that we started even before the process kicked off. And the premise, or like the objective of this project, is to really include multi-stakeholders in the work of the HC. So exactly to the topic of today's session. So when we were thinking about, okay, we need to not only provide the platform for meaningful participation, but also we need to provide the substance, as Louise mentioned. So we've been thinking about, okay, what would be the best way to do that? And it's really sort of important to understand the kind of, obviously, and be very much aware of the context against which the negotiations are taking place. So as we know, states submitted, so 29 states, that's good, but it's still, you know, a very small number out of the kind of all the delegations or all the member states taking part in the process. So the states are being asked to submit treaty texts on a number of issues, some of which, as we said, are quite technical, very legal, and a rather short time frame they're doing that. So this creates a pressure on some, if not most, delegations to submit text that not only reflects their perspective, but is at the same time nuanced and takes into consideration existing scholarship and practices. So I think this is where really sort of our role comes in, is how do we help sort of provide that nuance, provide that kind of bring into the table the existing work that has been done on these areas. And also, again, you know, I think it's very important to keep an agile approach when it comes to this process, and because it's a very much a live process, and we have to kind of evolve in our approach in the way the negotiations are evolving, and understanding really where the sticking points are and trying to sort of help with that. So based on that logic, we, after our participation in session 1, we thought, okay, what are some of the issues that we can provide some research on, some research that could help delegations sort of form their position while being aware of the evidence that you mentioned, Ian. So we came up with a couple of topics for just this first round. The first one is around gender and cybercrime, and because, you know, gender has been mentioned by many delegations and as part of session 1, how important gender is for this convention, how important that there is enough awareness of the gendered impact of cybercrime, but there's also a lot of ambiguity around what does that actually mean in practice, and what does it actually mean to mainstream gender into a cybercrime convention. So we've developed this briefing paper that looks exactly on this topic, gender and cybercrime. We are now currently translating it into the 6 UN languages. We'll be posting it on the AHC website, and we'll be also conducting a side event in the second session to talk about its key findings and have a conversation. We've also worked with you and GI-TOC, Ian, of course, to draw on the experiences from the 2 big, crime treaties on corruption and transnational organized crime, because also these 2 treaties were mentioned abundantly in the first session that we should build on INTOC, INCAC, etc. So we asked ourselves, what does that actually mean? You know, because there's a lot of words or a lot of positions that are mentioned, but it's not always necessarily unpacked in a clear way to other delegations. So we said, okay, let's see what does that actually mean, and then we're looking together with you, of course, about what was because the INCAC had the same sort of challenge of defining corruption. So okay, how did they do it? What did they agree in the end? And what was this approach? And what was the sort of merits of that approach? And also thinking about sovereignty, which was one of the main contentious points during the first session. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's important to, while having those big kind of points that we need to reiterate around sort of human rights and safeguards, etc. And there's a lot of organizations working on exactly that topic. I think also it's important to keep that agile approach and understand where the needs are and try to bring the expertise to the table. So there is this sort of practical way of feeding directly into the negotiations.
Great, thank you. I'm going to interrupt my own questions that I have planned and ask Tarek Kosa has posted a very interesting question in the chat, which we haven't really focused on. Tarek, I don't know if you're there and available to take the floor and explain this and ask this question to the panelists. Claudio, maybe you need to unmute Tarek. Oh, there he is. Tarek, welcome to the event. Tarek is a fellow board member of the NGO Alliance and a good colleague of civil society. Please, Tarek, the floor is yours. Ask the question.
Thank you, Ian. for having this very important conversation around this cybercrime treaty being negotiated. I was really heartened to hear Ambassador, the chair, Mebarki of Algeria, how inclusive she wants the process to be, and especially, emphasis on expertise, professionalism. And of course, Ambassador from Canada, Ambassador Troy, it is his remarks about the civil society as a collective conscience, and the three issues that he mentioned in terms of advocacy, transparency, and accountability, that I am posing this question to the panelists, because it is the key issue here is the political will and the environment that we understand globally. So in that context, human rights and rule of law, although the buzzwords, but how do you really translate them into sort of a treaty which really advocates them? And especially Joyce raised the issue of gender, and that is another area. So from that perspective, I would like to hear views of any panelist, that how would you reconcile these civil society objectives with an overall political environment? And thank you for an excellent presentation by the panelists, Louise, Joyce, and Summer. We look forward to really working with you. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Tarek. Okay, I will ask Louise to take that question first, very briefly, because we don't have much time left at all. So if you can be brief with your response.
Absolutely, Ian. I think, the precondition, I guess, at least from us over at IGRAP, and I guess most of the organizations here kind of agree, is that cybercrime should be absolutely consistent with human rights obligations set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I think this is, let's say, the pre to the conversation. And when we're thinking about human rights, let's say in terms of criminalization and actually thinking about what a text would include. So it would definitely, let's say, include exercises such as considering, when we're talking about cybercrime, to think about what would be the criteria to think about that, and would include, for example, malicious intent. Not only that, but also the scale and speed, which is something that other member states have also kind of raised in the discussion, but also whenever it actually undermines fundamental and human rights. So I think this is a practical way in which we can think not only human rights as, let's say, the starter of the conversation and, let's say, the guide to thinking what a text would be, who it would serve, right? The individuals, the victims that are facing cybercrime every day, us, as we said, as Summer said, we're facing that every single day in one way or another, but also actually having specific criteria that would ensure that human rights are part of the operationalization of the treaty.
Thanks, Louise. Summer, if I can ask you to respond to Tarek's question as well, please, very briefly.
Sure. Yeah. I think in our guidance note we went a little bit further and said that there could be passages that are put into this convention that actually promote positive rights. So nothing in this treaty should circumvent XYZ, like issues related to digital privacy or certain human rights online. That may not happen, but I think we should start thinking that far out and then come back from human rights instead of hoping that they will become part of it in a certain way. But of course, I agree with Louise and all that she said as well, references to civil political rights, and the UDHR. And I also think that this should be thought of as a rule of law treaty as much as something that helps law enforcement sort of do their processes. So we have to really think about how we want to include justice systems, how we want to include issues such as like due process and proportionality. So, sort of thinking broadly and across who's involved in implementing the treaty, I think is important.
Thank you, Summer. And maybe you can post a link to the guidance note, and Joyce, Louise, feel free to post the resources that your organizations have produced. Joyce, I think this will be the last intervention from the panel before we go to the closing remarks. Joyce, please, you can respond to this question.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm not going to be, I'm going to be very short. Everything Louise and Summer said, and also add that there's a lot of experiences from national experiences of things that, you know, you shouldn't do when you are drafting cybercrime legislation and when you are drafting these policies. And there are the human rights abuses or the ways in which these legislation have been used to misinterpreted and abused, I have to say, in different countries have been very well documented. So there's a lot of really practical examples that can be put on the table and very practical ways of things to avoid really in this convention. So human rights is not just a buzzword, but actually has very sort of practical meanings in every provision of the convention. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Joyce, Louise, and Summer for taking part in that panel discussion. I think the attendees will have heard a lot of different perspectives and hopefully are able to better visualize and kind of anticipate what kind of inputs you will all be bringing to the process as it moves forward. And I'm sure we're all looking forward to seeing each other in person at the upcoming engagements that the ad hoc committee will be having. I also thank once again Ambassador Mabaki, Ambassador Lulashnik. We're not finished yet. We still have a few minutes left. I'm now going to ask Eric Doval Lacerda Segosio, Vice Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee and a councillor at the Permanent Mission of Brazil to the UN here in Vienna, to give us some closing remarks. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you, Jan. I hope you listen to me well. I wish we had time to discuss and go on picking up the points that were mentioned, that were very important and very useful to me. I could talk about the necessity of regional perspective from Leeds, for example, or talking about gender and cybercrime from Joyce, Summer, and the need for perspectives and more meetings in person, and so many very useful points. And I take this last mention about perspectives just to say a few words about how we think and how important it is for stakeholders to be present. It is essential for us. We need the different perspectives from different stakeholders, academia and private sector. And I give only one example, is that in the intersessional, I was not understanding very well the discussion, and I made a very simple question to the organizations that were there. And my question was, do you want a convention on cybercrime? And the answer to my surprise was no. We don't actually want, and we don't think it's necessary. I know, as mentioned in this panel, there are several organizations, and it's very heterogeneous, the stakeholders. But it was a surprise for me, and because from the government perspective, we see that we need new tools to combat cybercrime. We need to evolve on what we have available. But it was important also because it made me stop and think about why some stakeholders don't actually want a convention. And the answer was because they were concerned about the misuse of a convention. And it made me, again, think about the safeguards we need to put on the convention. Of course, those are in our submission from Brazil. But it was very important. I think it's a difference of perspective. I think we exchange views, actually. We understand the concerns of stakeholders, but also we want to say to stakeholders that countries feel that this would be very important and that we can work together and continue exchanging views. And if we need, you can emphasize to us, to Brazil at least, and to several other countries, what do you think is important? Just the way we did today. And I took good note of that. And this is the main thing. This is an exchange. We need our perspective. We want also for stakeholders to listen to our perspective. And we are looking very forward for the discussions in the intersessional and in the margins of our meeting. I think the member states were very happy to be able to solve this question of stakeholder participation in a good way, different from other groups. We commend also our chair, and we will be, as a delegation and as vice chair, very always ready to exchange and continue talking to you and commend GI-TOC and global initiative on your participation and on this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for the clear kind of perspectives that you bring. We've run out of time, so I just want to say thank you to all the participants. Thank you to the Igarepe Institute for sponsoring this event, and thank you to Chatham House, the permanent missions of Switzerland, UK, and Canada for co-sponsoring it. The NGO Alliance and the Global Initiative were also co-sponsors as well. As I say, it's been fantastic, and we look forward to continuing this debate alongside within the negotiations and alongside the negotiations towards the UN Treaty on Cybercrime. Thank you very much.